get started here. I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. We've been kind of working on this for a while. If those of you that don't know me, my name is Eric Friedman. I'm the Executive Director of the Mad River Valley Chamber of Commerce. And this roundtable kind of grew out of a really simple conversation that Ryan from Hostel Tebre had at one of our lodging meetings. And he brought up some issues that he was having and some challenges that he was dealing with during fire inspections. And that really sparked a broader conversation. And it became very clear that there were a lot of businesses that were struggling to understand how fire and safety codes work and what's required, what's recommended, and how to comply. And everyone, I think, feels like they want to do the right thing safety-wise, but there's a lot of challenges involved. In response to that, the chamber reached out to state officials and our legislators to help bring some clarity and open up a direct line of conversation, which in turn led to the idea of doing this fire and safety roundtable. Safety is obviously a top priority for the businesses in our community, but navigating the requirements can sometimes be complex, especially for business owners, builders, tradespeople that are working in existing buildings and historic buildings or have seasonal operations. Today's roundtable is about creating some space for an open dialogue about this issue, sharing some understanding and practical problem solving, and bringing local businesses and state officials together with the shared goal of keeping everybody safe. So with that, I'd like to welcome our panelists here today. Ben Moffitt was unable to be here, unfortunately. He's deputy director.
He is a regional manager.
Regional manager of the Division of Fire Safety. But there's a bug going around, and he unfortunately got that. Wish him the best. But Landon Wheeler is here. He's the deputy director of the Division of Fire Safety. And Allison Martino, who lives here in Waitsfield, is an administrator at the central office, which is in Waterbury. So today, this is a conversation, it's not a presentation. I wanted to introduce the panelists and kind of moderate it. And the idea here is to get some clarity and predictability and understanding, not to debate so much, but just get, so we'd really appreciate if you would frame questions in ways that will help others in the room. And speak from experience and not accusatory and things like that. We really want to keep things, very civil and not that I'm too worried about it, but I just, wanted to say that. So to start out with, maybe Landon, we'll start off with you from your perspective. What do you wish that business owners in the Valley better understood about fire and life safety? And what do you think business owners wish the state better understood about operating small businesses or seasonal businesses and what we're dealing with here?
Well, let's start with the first part of that question. That's an easier one for me because that's my perspective. The second half of that question is what I think your perspective is. So we might need a little help on that. But what I'd love for all of you to know is all the things that the Division of Fire Safety does with how little we do it with. And that might help put some perspective on things. The Division of Fire Safety covers all of the communities in the state of Vermont except for 9 that have municipal agreements with the Division of Fire Safety, meaning they enforce my codes and standards, your codes and standards at a local level. They're usually the larger communities within the state, such as Montpelier, South Burlington, Brattleboro, and Bennington are some examples. The Division of Fire Safety is a very small state agency, but we do a lot. The State Fire Academy falls under the Division of Fire Safety. The State Urban Search and Rescue Team does. The State Hazmat Team. The State Arson and Explosives Investigation Unit is half made up of fire marshals and half made up of state police. And we now, as of 2022, are the residential health and safety inspectors for the state of Vermont. We do all of the residential health and safety inspections throughout the entire state with 4 inspectors right now. I have 16 fire marshals that cover 251 or 2, depending on what you call the villages, in the state of Vermont. So 16 fire marshals do all of the inspections for new construction, and the inspections that may normally happen in a property that you may own or operate, unless it's residential in nature. And we are not management heavy. We are one of the very few state agencies that are not. I have 4 regional managers that report to me, and I report to the director of the Division of Fire Safety, who reports to the Commissioner of Public Safety. So that a little bit about who we are and how we're organized and how small we really are and how much work we do. Roughly, we process somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 construction permits in a year with that staff. And that's with 8 plan reviewers. We process 5,000 plumbing inspections, and that's with 3 plumbing inspectors in the state. We process, I think it's roughly 2,000 permits and 3,000 inspections for electrical inspectors, and that's with 8 electrical inspectors statewide, 2 in each regional office. So we do a whole lot with not a lot of resources. So that's a little bit about who we are, what we do, but the biggest thing I want you to take away is every one of my fire marshals is a human. They are absolutely all human. They are not robots. They cannot remember all 304 code books that we adopt in the state of Vermont. When I say 304 code books, that's a stack that would be about this high. They're not all applicable to every building or every situation or every use, and that's why we have so many. But we do quite a lot with not a lot of resources. The second part of that question is for me, and looking at your perspective. I was a field inspector before I became a manager and before I became the deputy director. So I have met hundreds, if not thousands, of business owners throughout my career, and it varies greatly on what you would like to know about us or what your concerns are with what we do. So, but some of the biggest ones are, how do I know if my building is compliant? When do I need to get a permit of a certain type? What work am I allowed to do, and whose discretion is that? Those are most of the common things. The biggest one is that the town told me that I didn't need a permit. So I'm going to tell everybody that's here, the town doesn't govern the Division of Fire Safety's permit process in any capacity. It's all run through the state. And the last thing that I'm going to leave all those statements in answers to both questions is your Division of Fire Safety is an educational-based enforcement agency, meaning we are an enforcement agency. We fall under DPS, same thing as the state police does, but we're educational-based. We educate, and then we use enforcement tools. So it's our absolute goal to always try and provide education way before we do any enforcement.
Excellent. That was a good roundup. Allison, from your perspective in the office, like anything you want to add from your perspective in terms of what you're dealing with?
Just a little bit. So Landon kind of touched on it, but I think clarity on what we actually do and who the resources are. It's most state agencies outsider looking in, I think, are very ambiguous. I know that from when I did agricultural things and that sort of stuff. So I think that's still just a hurdle for our customers as well. But always feel free to call because we'll help you as best we can. That's what we're there for.
Excellent, thank you. I just really kind of want to open it up to questions. I didn't really want this to be a presentation. I really wanted this to be people asking real questions. Does anyone have anything they want to bring up? Yes, if you could identify yourself too, it would be great.
The name is Bill Bernstein. I am with a ski club here in Waitsfield. Mm-hmm. We have a lodge that sleeps 54 people. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming that the use is the equivalent of an inn or a hotel.
It's classified as a hotel dormitory with our codes and standards, yes.
So I have a couple of questions. One question would be, we have a fire pit in the backyard. Are there any rules with respect to that fire pit?
There are, and I don't know how in detail we want to get here, so I'm gonna just say, fire pits and open flame should be 25 feet from a structure. It should be able to hold the materials that are being burnt within that as a containment device so that the fire doesn't spread. And pay attention to your local fire department guidance. Fire wardens typically don't enforce fires that are within a containment. But when the state and Department of Agricultural, Fish and Wildlife, Agricultural, and Parks and Recs issue no burns, we also issue no burns. So those are the most important things that I can tell you without getting really, really specific. 25 feet from a building with an open flame is really important. I'm just gonna toss grills in there too, because Vermont is absolutely famous for burning down at least a few condos a year with grills on people's decks. Grills should be 10 feet from a combustible surface, combustible material, and from a structure. But any follow-up to that?
Yeah, what are the rules for a fireplace, a wood-burning fireplace?
Well, there's a whole book and a standard that covers that. So I am the right guy to talk about codes all day long because that's what I do for a living and I have for a long time, right? And I can quote them all to you, but it's going to sound like gibberish. So the code that covers that, it's a solid fuel burning appliance code. It's NFPA 211. And, but more important than that code book is the manufacturer's directions. And I can't emphasize that enough because all of the new appliances that you can all go buy today come with manufacturer's directions, and those manufacturer's directions are actually the guidance document for how that should be installed. You can't have directions to install something that's going to violate the listing of how it was tested. So if you buy a new appliance, follow the directions for the installation. And if it's in a public building, it does have to be maintained on an annual basis, and it has to be swept by a certified chimney sweep in the state of Vermont. It is required on an annual basis for public buildings. Any person that would call me and I didn't have jurisdiction, I would tell them the exact same thing, except I would say I recommend instead of it's required. That's the only difference.
So this is a stone fireplace that was built at least 75 years ago.
Yep.
We put in a liner so that the chimney is not an issue. So we obviously don't have manufacturer's recommendations.
And that's where the code comes in. So where there are not direct, and you could be surprised if you can find a manufacturer of the appliance and a serial number, you probably could, with the internet today, find manufacturer's instructions for it. They are that prevalent. I have found stuff that's really, really old. But when there is no listing for an appliance that's already something like you're describing, the codes and standards that are in NFPA 211 would be the guidance document. Separation distance from combustible materials, how big the hearth has to be, and the size of the hearth is dictated by the opening size of the fireplace itself. But that book is about this thick, and it has a specific chapter on fireplaces and wood stoves. But if you were looking for really, and I'm going to say this a few times today, so you don't have to remember it right now, every code book that the state of Vermont utilizes has a free version that you can look at. So if you were taking notes today, I would say go to www.nfpa.org. And there's a free read-only version of the codes, and you're looking for NFPA 211, solid fuel burning appliance.
Well, I'm impressed that you know that off the top of your head.
It's going to get better.
Right? Well, I mean, it's interesting, because you bring up very specific things, and one of the things that you mentioned was you said something I would recommend that, and what's the difference between like what's required and what's recommended?
Yeah.
And how is the situation dictate that.
Do you mind if I talk about how codes become laws?
Sure.
All right. So every code that we and the State of Vermont Division of Fire Safety utilize is actually a law. We actually have to take all of the codes that we want to utilize and we have to put them into two separate legislative processes, ICAR and LCAR. And they go through legislative review, they go through public comment, we interact with our stakeholders before we ever adopt new codes and standards. And this, I say all this because I'm very proud of it, we just adopted new codes and standards in Vermont. It doesn't have huge changes and impacts industry-wide. But the last time that we adopted new codes was almost 11 years ago. And the nation, on average, adopts new codes and standards every 3 years. It was very difficult for us at the Division of Fire Safety in those 11 years, to try and adopt new codes and standards because we had 3 floods and a pandemic. And the Division of Fire Safety played a role in all of those things, played a huge role of our staffing and all of those things. So we go through all those processes. We go through the legal process, the legal legislative process. We go through the legislative review process, and then those become law. So every code and standard that we actually adopt through our rulemaking process is a law in the state of Vermont, and that's where the shall comes into play. So when I say should, that means there's an option. When I say shall, that means it's a law, and that's what needs to happen. But there are variables in that statement, but that kind of summarizes that process.
Excellent.
Yeah.
A question from Jim West Sugar Bush. From a real estate perspective, in the last 5 years I've bought 3 commercial properties. 2 of them had existing reports from previous purchases with things that needed to be remedied that had, and we're talking properties that had been owned by the previous owner for 10 years. We go in thinking that the property is kosher, everything's good, but we call you guys and say, hey, come inspect.
Yep.
So then we're on a ticking timeline of, purchase sale agreement, contract, holding money back.
Yep.
90 days, we don't get the report back. Administratively, and this isn't necessarily the inspector's fault, it might be an administrative issue or whatever. From a purchaser's point of view, how do we address that other than as soon as I find a property, do I call you guys in and say, I might be interested in this? And can you guys look up an old report or?
Let's talk that through.
Because that really does not have to be disclosed by the previous owner.
The report doesn't?
Does it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Disclosing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we put,
But we're also talking violations that are 10, 15, 20 years old
Yeah.
and haven't been addressed.
and that's a different issue. Let's talk about them separately. We should be following up on every inspection, and that's our objective in the state. But we give everything a risk index in the state of Vermont between 1 and 5. 1 is I'm not coming back because everything is good, and 5 is I'm dialing 911 and I'm evacuating the building. So if you get a report and it has a 3 on that, that means that my staff should be doing a follow-up inspection on that based off of the violations that the building has. Does it happen every single time on time? No, it doesn't. And there's a lot of variables there. Properties sell and we can't contact a new owner. Somebody tells us it's going to be a single family home instead of a rental. It's unoccupied. We have other difficulties with following it up. I'm using the residential issues that we typically have, but this happens across all occupancy types. But our records are all public records, and our public records are pretty readily available. The good news to this, I love giving good news to all of these statements. It's been fun. The Division of Fire Safety is going through a whole records management system upgrade. It'll be completed in roughly a year. All of our documents from that point forward and anything we can capture from our existing database will be forward-facing public records, just like Act 250s or Agency of Natural Resources as an example. So there'll be a portal that you can go to and just type in the address and pull up and see what records we have of that. Back to timeframes and reports. My inspectors, my inspectors' policies are that inspection reports are provided within 10 business days after the inspection is completed. So if that's not happening, that's a separate issue, and we need to know about it, because if we don't know, then we can't do anything to change that. If you have a property that's going for prospective sale, getting that inspection done, it probably is beneficial, especially if it's difficult getting on an inspector's schedule. There is no law mandating that process. There's no, I'm going to explain that a little further. There's no law that says if I'm going to sell my condo, I have to have an inspection completed on it prior to the sale. And there's liability there for both parties, the buyer and the seller, disclosure or non-disclosure issues. So we always recommend that that inspection takes place and that happens, but there's no law that mandates it. What the law says is that no building that's a public building in Vermont can be occupied in whole or in part that's in violation of the codes and standards that we adopt. So anybody could be liable for those corrections of violations at any point if they don't get an inspection, and that's the issue.
So a follow-up question.
Yep.
NFPA is changing for a 100-person restaurant to 50-person. 50-person must now be sprinkled. I'm buying a 100-person restaurant. Am I responsible for putting a sprinkler system in that restaurant? As a new owner?
It's a pretty specific, I'd have to look it up to give you a specific answer. There's usually a word that's a trigger. If it says new, then it's retroactive. Every code, thank you for this question. Every code except for rooming and lodging and for rehabilitation chapter of the code in NFPA 101, which is the life safety code, has an existing chapter and a new chapter. So all the codes, obviously for a brand new building that's being built from the ground up, would fall under the new code. Existing buildings stay in the existing code. The reason I'm explaining this is the existing code is designed to change very little throughout time. You don't reinvent the wheel every 3 years and have to go re-inspect every building and say you have to make all of these changes. So the changes throughout time should be small. The problem is if you have a building and it hasn't been inspected in 30 years, it could be 10 code cycles worth of accumulation of code things that need to be changed. But existing buildings typically have a lot more leeway when it comes to retroactiveness of other significant codes and standards. I'm going to tell you that example that you just gave me has already changed twice since 2012. The Station nightclub fire, I'm sure everybody heard about this. It created a national change in codes in the middle of a code cycle, which doesn't happen. And NFPA, which is the creator of the codes, actually amended and said all of any assembly occupancy with 100 people or more had to be sprinkled. Like months after that fire. They had since then, in the next code cycle, they actually took a step back and said we need to phase this in. That was too drastic. But I'm going to tell you, assembly occupancies are extremely high risk. The people that are in A2 occupancies, such as nightclubs, dance studios, facilities that serve alcohol, are typically in an altered mental status, meaning they are not they're not always in their full capacity. And the code identifies that and says that this is a higher risk occupancy. And typically accidents do happen in those environments at a higher rate. So, that answer that question? Yeah?
Does change of use trigger new depending, or So if you have a change of use in an existing building,
Yeah.
does that trigger new?
For all codes except for ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, it does. There was, the code is designed to say, hey, what are the differences between this use and this use? And then use these codes to fix that. I'm going to give you an example of, I have a giant business occupancy and now I want to make it into a residential occupancy. They are nothing alike. Those uses don't resemble at all. So Chapter 43 of the Life Safety Code says when you have this situation, these are the codes that you have to use that are new requirements, but they're specific. If you have things that are similar, those code requirements and those changes are less drastic. But yes, it can happen, absolutely, for sure. A building, I want to use one more example. A single-family home in the state of Vermont requires 0 permits if it's owner-occupied. That means the entire structure is going to get built with no oversight, no inspections. The only liability is going to be between the owner and the builder of that property. In Vermont, those buildings regularly become public buildings. As soon as they're rented for one day, that building becomes a public building. So that building that was built to, some of these can be tens of millions of dollars, and then somebody purchases it and says, I want to use this as an investment property, and it has 0 life safety equipment, it has 0 inspection history, it has 0 documentation of its creation. It can have some significant changes and requirements from the codes to put things in perspective. Any follow-up to that?
Yeah, change of use in volume. So if you had a building that had 6 units, and
Yep.
3 are commercial and 3 are residential, and you meet the code when it was built. If you change that to 4 and 2 as an example,
Yep.
same uses, different numbers?
Yeah, the numbers don't matter, it's about the space. And the reason for that is, if I had 12 in one space, and 6 were for manufacture of extraction of cannabinoids for cannabis, and the other 6 were residential occupancies, you can't flip-flop them. They're not interchangeable. The uses are different, and the risks are different that are associated with those uses. An example is, there's not a smoke detector in this room, and there's not a carbon monoxide detector in this room. That's Wi-Fi. We wouldn't want to sleep in this space, right? Because we'd have no way to know if there was a carbon monoxide issue, and we'd have no way to know if there was a smoke condition above us that we didn't notice or see. I hope we all would, because we're all awake.
There's one up there on top by the window.
Oh, those are heat detectors.
Nice try, Brandon.
That's like smoke over there, man. I'm telling you.
It might be. It could be. But I want to use this room as an example. So pretend that those aren't there. But if everybody looks behind you and you see at the exits, everybody's alert and aware. So if something bad happens in this environment, we should go towards the exits, and there's pull stations that are there. So we should pull those pull stations to activate the fire alarm system, to get everybody's attention and to get everybody out of the building, and then get the fire department to start coming here. That's the order of operations. Then we dial 911 when we're outside and we're safe. Not while we're inside, not while we're anywhere else. But I digress. That was my example, and thank you for pointing those out. They could be smokes. That one looks like it's a heat, but it could be a smoke.
This is.
All right. Yes.
Sean?
You had mentioned that every sector, I guess, has 2 books, the new and existing.
Yeah.
Except for lodging and
Rooming and lodging.
rooming and lodging. Do they only have one, or what?
They have a singular, yeah, so they have a singular chat. Rooming and lodging covers transient type lodging with 9 to 16 people in it, and it's NFPA 101, Chapter 26 is the reference standard. And the reason is it's not designed to be difficult to meet. It is designed to capture the historic Airbnbs that used to be called like guest cottages or had different terms throughout time. But now, well, they're utilized in lots of different ways. In that chapter specifically, it calls out if you have a new building, what you have to comply with as a new building.
So I guess,
Sprinkler is an example.
so to follow up with that, just you mentioned Airbnb, so let's say short-term rental,
Yeah.
what would have been called a B&B.
Yeah.
So are we now connecting those as similar things?
They're all-
Short-term rental that's 9 to 16?
Yeah, so,
As long as it's 9, I guess, is the question?
yeah,
Nice.
really good questions that are coming out of this group today. Thanks. The Division of Fire Safety doesn't use any of those terms. So we classify things by the occupancy and the use, right? So if you have 8 or less people, what we did is we call that a 1 and 2 family dwelling. And I'm going to explain what we do, and then I'm going to explain what the rest of the country does, right? If it's 9 to 16, we call it rooming and lodging, and it has its own chapter of the code because there's more people and there's more risk. So there are more codes associated with it. If you go above 16, 17 or more, it is hotel and dormitory. And out of those 3, chapter 24 is 1 and 2 family. It doesn't have a new and existing. It calls out new and existing. Chapter 26 has just 1 chapter for rooming and lodging, and it calls out the new requirements within that chapter. We amend that to be friendlier for Vermont's environment. As a young inspector here 20 years ago, it was very difficult to go into some of these short-term rental properties and say, if you have space for 3 or more people, I have to use this higher standard. And that's the way the national code is written. It says if you have 3 people that live outside of the family group or entity that are transient in nature, that you're rooming and lodging. We amend that in Vermont to say 8 so that we can kind of capture what our single family homes are being utilized for and have a reasonable level of safety within those buildings. But that is an amendment within our rules. Allison, could you show them what our rules look like? That's them. We are very proud of them.
You can access them online as well. There's links on our website.
And I brought business cards so everybody doesn't have to remember our website.
So like bedtime reading.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Lots of numbers with all those letters. Yep.
Yes. Yep. But these have been great
Brandon?
questions.
Yeah, so say you have a commercial building and, you get some violation that wasn't in any of the historical reports. And you ask, or you give recommend, or you come up with ways to solve whatever that is, and they keep shooting them down. What do you do now? And then when the contractor can't even come up with an idea on how to fix it, then
Yeah. It sounds like a really complex issue.
not really, but they make it.
Yeah, we have a variance process in the state of Vermont. Variances can be denied, and then there's a review of a variance from there. So let's talk that through. An inspector comes to your property, they do an inspection, they provide you with a report. You say, what do you mean by this? They provide you the code information saying this is a violation and this is why it is. You can file for a variance that would be reviewed at the regional level. That variance can say, this is what I'm offering as an alternative to what the code says, but it can't be a waiver. So it doesn't mean you don't do anything. It's you're offering something in lieu of. And that's the way it's actually written statutorily. If it's denied at the regional level, you can resubmit for director review, and it can go to the director for review. It's very very rare to not have resolution to an issue in some way that it gets to that level. So I'm curious, and we can talk offline. If you have something that's outstanding and
Unfixable right now.
yeah,
Unresolvable, yeah.
Okay.
I'll vouch that I've had those issues in buildings and gone to Ben Moffitt with those issues, and what would have been $200,000 fix turned into, a stool in front of the window so they could get out on a 42-inch or whatever.
Yeah.
Or putting the bed.
I tried that already, that's not working.
Right. So.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm pretty creative.
right? Well, creativity doesn't always mean meeting the intent of the code, right? So your idea and somebody who's reviewing it, the person that's reviewing it that says, I understand what the intent of the code is trying to achieve, and what you're telling me you're providing me isn't achieving that. So, but make sure you get my card and let's chat. Because, and I may already know what it is. We're a small agency, so every variance that comes into the division, it gets discussed amongst all of the most senior people and the management. So that for a few reasons, everybody's going to love this word. We do try to be consistent. We try to be as consistent as we possibly can with what we have for resources. But that's the number one reason. The other one reason is sometimes we can help find resolution to items without having to use a variance. That stool, if it's accepted as a reasonable alternative and it's fixed in place and it's meeting the distance between the top of that step and that sill, it's meeting the intent of the code. The code says the authority having jurisdiction gets to make that choice and that decision, but it's a resolution to that issue without having to get a variance. So those things do happen, and sometimes we do have to get creative, and sometimes when there's a real sticking issue, we have to get more brains together and try to find resolution to things. Yeah. We had a few hands up on this side, and then we can go back that way. But
2 questions. When will that public portal data be available?
I don't, has anybody built a records management system in this room? It is unreal. What's that?
It's a power station.
Yeah. So our hopeful right now, my scheduled go live date is August of 2026. But I'm going to let you know, this system that we are working with our vendor for, we are trying to capture every single element that we have that we can make more efficient for both you as a client and us as the Division of Fire Safety. So it's taking us some time with the resources that I have to allocate to helping build that process out. It's, I've spent 18 months in a lot of hundreds and hundreds of hours with that vendor, myself and Allison, because Allison has to come to the meetings that I do.
All right, my second question.
Yeah.
So this is specific to the Valley. It seems like there's a lot of focus on, and this is not a bad thing, fire safety in the condos in the Valley.
Mm-hmm.
Is this unique to the Mad River Valley, or is your department all over the state, all the ski towns?
Yeah. There's so many good answers to this. I actually come from the Ludlow area, believe it or not, and that's where I was the fire marshal. Residential occupancies will always be a priority and the highest risk in the state of Vermont. Unfortunately, this year alone, or the year that just ended, we had 11 fatalities, and 100% of those 11 fatalities were all in residential occupancies. So there's a risk-based answer to that, where the risk of where we have fatalities, injuries, and structural fires is in residential occupancy. So yes, they get more of our time and resources, but they will always be our priority because that risk just doesn't change, unfortunately, for those. Statewide, the vast majority of our inspections are residential in nature, whether it's complaint-based or whether it's because we don't have recent inspection history. And remember earlier when I said codes change every 3 years, it's really hard for us to go to a facility that hasn't been inspected in 30 years and say, your smoke detectors are older than some of my inspectors, and they were required to be changed out every 10 years. So they should have already been on your third life cycle for smoke detectors. One more thing I want to add to that is a lot of the condos that were built in the state of Vermont were built by, I'm going to call them traveling contractors. They were contractors that came from other states. They built them very quickly, and they used their most efficient processes to build them, which gave us a lot of mixed results, including we had entire condo developments that were built and had 0 permits and 0 inspections in the state of Vermont 30 and 40 years ago at this point. So in the 70s, 80s, and 90s was the condo boom, really the big boom in Vermont. And I think back then there was 8 total fire inspectors in the entire state. So it was a very difficult process. So I hope that gives you a little bit of insight, and it's some insight why. But where people sleep are our highest risks in Vermont, and it's really where we need to protect people the most, because that's where we're most vulnerable. The changes, outside of some of the really different condos that were built by really creative designers, which can be very problematic with lofts and basements that are non-compliant and stairwells that are non-compliant and second means of escape that are 50 feet off of the ground because it was built into ledge.
With a wood stove.
With a wood stove. And that's not rare. The wood stove issue in Vermont, yes, it's not rare. But I hope that gives you a little bit of insight on why. The state of Vermont does not pick out any singular type of occupancy and give that more attention or bias than any other. We give everything a risk based off of a risk matrix of where it is, and then we classify our inspections on those types of occupancies. So I'm not looking at just single family homes or rooming and lodging or hotel dormitory or say condos. I'm looking at that group, residential group as a whole. Yes. Who's next?
I got a 2-part question.
Okay.
Let's go, then I'll let you go, Brandon. You mentioned earlier, like at the beginning, that town-site certain things don't need to be permitted. Can you give an idea, like say, what we really need to get permitted,
Yeah.
what we don't, and as business owners, what we are and aren't allowed to do?
Yeah. Discretion in a public building is always going to be the fire marshals, 100%. I say that because I'm going to tell you what the law says.
Okay.
The law says any construction, alteration, renovation, or demolition in a public building requires a permit. That leaves 0 room for anything. Yeah, construction, alteration, renovation, or demolition, that's all encompassing. So if you have a discretion question about do I need to get a permit, I'm going to tell you to reach out to your fire marshal and to say, hey, I have this simple job here, do you want me to get a permit? There are some things that we do provide, like if you called me on the phone and said, I'm gonna take an asphalt shingle off of a roof and replace it in kind on that same roof. Do I need to get a permit? And I'm gonna say, I bet you're not gonna do a 1-for-1, but if you do a 1-for-1, then sure, I'm not gonna ask for a permit. Because I know as soon as you pull that off, the decking is gonna be rotted, some of the trim is gonna be rotted, you're gonna start replacing some structural elements, you're gonna get around the chimney and you're gonna find more rot, because it's Vermont, and anywhere there's a deck or an opening, you're gonna find more rot. So your project's probably gonna expand, and you probably should have just got a permit. But wallpaper, paint, things like that, I'm gonna tell you over the phone. If you're just doing wallpaper and paint, you do not need to get a permit. That's all for a public building. If you ask me that same question for an owner-occupied home, I'm gonna say you can do almost anything you want. If it's tied into sewer or water that's public, you have to have a licensed plumber do the work, and you have to have a work notice. But that's the rarity, that's the exception. And the reason for that is, obviously, if you're tied into public utilities, you could cause harm by not knowing what you're doing. So, did that answer that first part of the question? This is another fun fact. The Division of Fire Safety should be one of the most reachable state agencies that are there. If you can't reach your fire marshal, say you have the fire marshal for your area's phone number and you can't reach them, you can call the regional office. Every one of my offices are staffed Monday through Friday from 8 until 4:30, and we have somebody that answers the phone at every office. So you don't typically end up with a robot, and you don't have to push multiple buttons. You'll end up talking to somebody, which helps with some of that discretion.
Brendan, do you want a question?
Yeah, you kind of answered some of it, but so if you're getting so say you're gonna do like a boiler swap out or something like that, and your plumber doesn't necessarily pull the permit. Like, what happens to you?
Yeah. I'm going to tell you that we are an educational-based enforcement agency. I'm
just saying. They happen to be with fireplace, but not the same.
Yeah, we are an educational-based enforcement agency, meaning we're going to try to learn from the experience, get our documentation to where it should be, and then close that out and then move on to our next project. That's typically how that process works. If we have unlicensed work that was completed by somebody that needed a license or certification to do that work, we're going to make somebody hire somebody that's qualified to oversee what was done and to say this was done correctly. So that's typically how that works. What worst case scenario, because I'm going to tell you it's the worst for me also, we have tools for enforcement. We don't want to use them. We have the ability to revoke occupancy. We have the ability to issue fines and citations. We have the ability to create findings and orders, which could lead get somebody in front of a judge. We have a lot of enforcement tools, but we always try to educate and work through an issue well before those are ever utilized.
But would you have to get the plumbing inspector involved before or after? Like, I don't even know. Where do you get the plumbing inspector involved?
If it's a plumbing related issue, he should be involved.
Okay.
Yeah.
Curious.
So my fire marshals, they have 304 code books that they have to try to learn.
Yeah.
So if there's something that's specific with plumbing, the hydronic side of a boiler is plumbing. But the boiler is the fire side, the hydronics is the boiler, the plumber side. So NFPA 31 is the governing standard for oil-fired equipment. I handle all of that. My plumbing inspector handles the hydronic side. So from any of the water intakes or outputs or anything outside of the heating loop.
Okay.
All right.
So would I be correct in saying that for owner-occupied single family, there is no building department that oversees it?
That's, yes.
Okay. And for everything else, your department is the building department for basically any issue on new construction or renovation.
Yeah.
And I also happen to own a house here, owner-occupied.
Yeah.
When you were talking about residential, you were saying that your people make inspections.
Mm-hmm.
My house has never been inspected. Will it be at some point?
If it's an owner-occupied single-family home, no.
Okay.
Because it's statutory. So your legislator, your elected officials, my elected officials, provide me with the authority of where I'm allowed to enforce my codes and standards. But I don't have, right now, the way the laws are written, and I don't expect it to change anytime soon, owner-occupied single-family homes are outside of the Division of Fire Safety's jurisdiction, except for plumbing. Is that a good thing? I'm going to tell you, if something happens at your house or you want a fire marshal to inspect a chimney or a fireplace and I say I can't because I don't have jurisdiction and it will be a liability issue, you probably think it's a really bad idea that I can't go there, right? But if you live in a house and you don't want those rules and codes and standards, you probably think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. But that's two different sides of things. I can't send a fire marshal to a house that I don't have jurisdiction in, and this is why. If I go to that house and I recognize something that's really dangerous and I don't have the ability to force you to fix it, then I could be liable if something bad happens. So I can't have that liability. So right now, owner-occupied single-family homes that are not attached to anything else are outside of our jurisdiction, along with some agricultural facilities.
Okay.
Yeah.
With respect to the ski lodge, is it a requirement that any electrical work be done by a licensed electrician?
100, yes.
Meaning a member couldn't make a repair of replacing a switch?
No. If you're touching wire nuts, you like the discretion back there. If you're touching wire nuts or you're undoing screws, you should have a licensed electrician be doing it. If it's a plug, like most new light fixtures, LED fixtures, things like that, where you're plugging two things in, that's okay.
Okay, so what about something like a railing for a deck? I assume that if we were to repair it, we don't need to go through the process of getting a permit.
The law says you should have a permit, but I'm going to talk to you about this because you have a ski community that probably has memberships to that community, and you have work details, and you probably do those work details in the off season. Everybody comes up with a list. You file one under 200K permit for all of the work detail items that you're going to do for that work period, and it's a really simple 2-page document, and it covers all of those things. But yes, theoretically, any construction, alteration, renovation, or demolition should require a permit. This specific example that you gave me is a really good one, but because between 2012 and 2018, the code changed on handrails. It said, the old handrails, you were allowed to mount them at 30 inches of height, and now it's higher because somehow Americans grew taller. But no, the average height of the Americans is what it's based off of. So if you installed it inappropriately and somebody's going to say, when did you install this? This looks brand new. You need to fix it. We don't want that to happen. And something that's even more prevalent in Vermont is because we have so much rot, is windows get replaced all the time. And people will say, hey, I got this really good deal. These are really high efficient windows. They replace them and then they're too small because they reduce them in size or did replacement style windows. We do amend our codes and standards to try and make that process easier, but we have wrong stuff that's put in all the time that if somebody filed a simple permit for, it probably wouldn't happen. And that's what we're trying to alleviate, is having people do things twice or 3 times in some cases.
But there's no requirement for licensing.
There is not.
With respect to someone doing carpentry.
Yep, so we don't license carpenters in the state of Vermont registered. If they do, I'm not a pro at this. There's a threshold to register contractors if they do X amount of work, but that is through Office of Professional Regulation, and that's not through the Division of Fire Safety, and it doesn't come with any regulatory burdens. So
you're not probably paying your people who are doing it, they're members of the club.
Well, we're not paying them.
yeah. Yeah, I don't think it would be applicable in this case. I just wanted to say it because there's a lot of other people here.
Yeah.
Yep.
The insurance company came and said they don't like our railing. It looks like it should be replaced.
Yeah.
And I used to be a contractor, I'm trained as an architect, so I understand,
Yep.
you know, what you're saying. But it's easy enough to meet those rules.
It can be very easy.
Yeah.
Sometimes not so easy. We have an example where somebody's having some difficulty, and that does happen. I'm gonna say it one more time. If you go to www.firesafety.vermont.gov, go under Building and Safety Services, and go under Permits, Applications, and Forms, we have a permit application called an under 200K permit that's on that page. And it's designed specifically for small projects. It's designed for renovations and modifications. So if you had a whole laundry list of stuff you were gonna do over the next 12 months, all you do is you give us a description of what those are gonna be, you fill out the permit application, you send it in with a very nominal fee, and we process it, we issue a permit, and that permit will actually have conditions. So if you were doing handrails, I bet you're gonna get a permit back with boilerplate language that says the handrail shall be mounted at this height, in this location, and it must be a graspable handrail. We give you the code information to try and make it a little bit easier on those conditions, as an example.
But does that also apply to things that are, say, non-structural and that are just almost like decorating if we were to replace trim in a room?
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you what my statement is always gonna be: the discretion is the fire marshal's discretion when it comes to where a permit's required. But if you called me and said, I'm gonna do some painting and replace a couple of pieces of trim around a window, I probably wouldn't ask for a permit. But the discretion is the fire marshal's that covers that area. Every permit means work for somebody, so I just want to make that clear, and also an inspection. So somebody has to review the permit application, somebody has to issue the permit, and then somebody has to inspect to close that permit out. So I would be hard pressed that if somebody was doing something really simple in nature and that was very straightforward, and it was communicated with a fire marshal, whether they're going to want to create more work. I don't see that happening.
And the easiest thing would be just to call the fire marshal
Yeah.
and say, this is what we're doing.
Yep, we encourage it every day. Yep.
Steve?
Steve Robbins, Maverick Valley Real Estate. So over the years, change in use, change in ownership is the part of the most common one. I've been attending 30 or 40, over the 30 years I've been doing this. And the prevalence of folks now renting out their home sort of bumps them from that owner-occupied single-family to the public building generality.
Yep.
I mean, and we're a second home market, which is even more prevalent. You don't have to be a second home owner to do it, but it's becoming one of those strategies that when you speak to a customer or buyer about their use over the course of it, if the word rental even never comes up, you should have a fire. Should have a fire marshal, fire warden come and do one of these inspections. What I heard was a good thing, you got to be there within 10 days because timing, sometimes it's a subject of a contract, maybe somebody's going to do after the fact, but they should still do it. I've seen a lot of those inspections I've been at them. There's almost always something on that last of the pages. Here's the thing, here's the line items. What I'm hearing now, and I don't know that people have always done, is of course you should get them repaired, right? But really, what you really have to do is also have somebody back.
Yeah.
And have another inspection. And, right, is this, I'm trying to sound it out so that we're giving the best advice possible, but also an expectation of, okay, so there was a short laundry list. There was an incandescent bulb in a closet, which is classic, needs to be done. Maybe there's a GFI here. Hopefully there's not a whole window replacement for egress, but a couple things. And you go through and you have them done. They should be done by contractors.
Yep.
But ultimately, the sign-off is a fire warden, fire marshal coming back and completing yet another document, as you said, it's work.
Mm-hmm.
That's the gold standard now that owner can say, we did it.
Yeah, that ultimately, that summarizes what a perfect situation looks like. I will say in the future that process will be easier. Smaller violations will be able to be reported to us through our new system that we're creating. So technology will help with that documentation part. But let's take that process from the beginning. Allison is covering for a regional office. We get a request for a purchase and sale. She processes it into our database. She assigns it to a fire marshal. Fire marshal calls the phone number on that request, schedules the inspection, completes an initial inspection, and a violation is found. A smoke detector is missing. It says this has to get replaced. That fire marshal has the discretion whether to accept a picture sometimes or proof that it has been installed, and would produce a clear document saying that, a clear report saying that it's been closed out, or completing a follow-up inspection and producing a clean report saying that has been closed out also. So that's the entire process and what, in a perfect world, what it looks like. What happens in a lot of cases is owner's lawyer says, hey, we should get an inspection done, file a change of use, change of ownership inspection request form. They file it, we complete the inspection, the owner gets a copy of the report, the new owner buys the property, says, hey, give me X amount of money off of this property, I'll make the fixes myself, and then the fixes don't happen, the follow-up inspection doesn't happen, and now it's an open inspection for my database. So at some point, one of my fire marshals is gonna say, I need to close this inspection out, and we'll be in touch with somebody. It will take more time, because we have to track people down at that point. We don't even, in most of those cases of what I just said for the change of use, change of ownership, we don't even know who the new owner is, because we only have information for the person that filed the paperwork with our office. So it can be difficult, but it will, that address, the violations stay with the building, obviously. So that address will stay as a violation in our system until it's cleared out. Did that answer that?
It does. I guess the last point is because when they're happening under, it doesn't always happen under contract, but if it's happening under contract, there's an effect on what's happening. There's a seller wants to sell, there's a buyer wants to buy, there's attorneys that are trying to suss it out. And what you said is actually quite accurate. There's a violation, it's either repaired, and the loop that's being closed is sometimes just some receipt. Electrical contractor A installed smoke detector, and that's enough for people to say, okay, they met it. But actually what I'm hearing is that no, actually there has to be another visit or a photo or something, that there's a document. Of the 30 or 40 or 50 that I've been to, I can't remember more than maybe twice where there was an actual document that I got to see where work A was done and document B was provided saying the original inspection was this first document. Here it is, the closeout. And it was in Montpelier, now that I think of the one, and Montpelier runs under its own.
It does. Anytime a fire marshal does an inspection, right? An inspection report is created, it should go to the owner of record or property or a representative of the ownership. That's what our mandate is. If it's a hazard index 3 or greater, meaning it's been judged to require some kind of follow-up by the fire marshal, it will pop up and it will populate my current database forever until there's another event that says that inspection has been completed or that process has been completed. So, somebody has documentation. It may not be you and you may not have seen it, but I bet you somebody has documentation. And it does happen. I have lawyers that have met me at purchase and sale inspections. I've had realtors. I've had buyers who had access to the building meet me on site, which is not usually the case. I've had owners who wanted to be there with their realtors, who also brought their contractors because they had an idea of what some of the issues would be. But all of them, and whoever meets me there is going to be the owner of record or the representative of the owner, and they're going to get a copy of that report. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Two questions actually, but the first one is, You mentioned if a property is rented even 1 day, it's considered public. So that falls under your jurisdiction, even if it's 8 and under.
Yeah.
Just trying to clarify
Yep.
that for myself, okay. Obviously not owner occupied, I understand.
Yeah.
That part. But as soon as it's rented for 1 day or more, it falls under the jurisdiction of the fire division.
It does. It's way different than the tax code, and that's why I say it the way that I do. You know, if you rent for 14 days and then there's another trigger at 30 days in the state of Vermont,
Right.
we have none of those triggers. My statute says if you rent a building in any capacity for any amount of time, it's a public building.
Okay.
So that's why I say it. Yeah.
Understood. But my other one is, you know, you buy a property, you get your inspection, fire inspection, it has a couple things, you take care of them. You go to pull a permit to make a change. And you get the permit, you make the change, the inspector comes back and all of a sudden starts finding these other things that weren't mentioned when you bought the property. So you weren't expecting any issues with it. And now you have all of a sudden, you've just opened a can of worms.
Yeah.
That had nothing to do with the permit you just pulled. That got done the way it was explained and everything else, but now all of a sudden, you're finding stuff.
Yeah.
And now there's a new report that all of a sudden says, by the way, you can't do this, you're gonna lose betting, you're gonna, whatever it might be, you gotta close. I mean, I understand it's not your goal, but it just, it could happen. I mean,
There's a lot of variables in that statement.
I understand, but and I guess part of it is a little bit of a statement, not just a question,
Yeah.
but the question was raised by Eric at the beginning of like your perception of us and our perception
Yep.
of, and then you can see a little bit of why someone's hesitant to even call you and ask a question, because all of a sudden you feel like you're opening a can of worms. I have an old building. It is what it is. I would try to maintain it. When we got there, we got an inspection. We've done what we had to do. But I know that's, you know, it's an old building. Things happen.
Yep.
But the code hasn't changed. But I wasn't told to make change. I mean, some things could have. I understand things could have changed, but not necessarily. They may not have, though,
Yeah.
in certain aspects.
Yeah.
And then it becomes very difficult to even consider making a change, to
Yep.
maybe bring it up to new codes, to new this, to new that, because you're too worried about what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
And the can of worms all of a sudden makes it where you can't run a business out of this building. It's no longer really viable. And I know that's not your problem necessarily, but it's the problem of the person who bought it and thought, we're going to spend this much, we're going to renovate for this much, we're going to move on. It seems like it's legit.
Yeah.
So,
And I can pause right there and we can follow up with if you have more. I want to talk about the different variables, but the first thing I want to explain is every fire marshal's inspection is a visual inspection. So if you walk through a building one time, you're going to notice some things. You walk through a building 2 times, you're going to notice some things. If you walk through a building multiple times, you may notice different things when you walk through that building. It's a visual inspection. I'm not in there with a camera that I go back to some lab and I sit there and study it detail by detail, right? So that's one aspect of perspective, right? But there's also one fire marshal may have a different visual inspection than a different fire marshal, and that's where consistency comes in. And that's something that we work on greatly at the Division of Fire Safety. And we train monthly as an entire division to try to make sure that we're hitting those consistency issues. But the other thing is codes do change and humans do touch stuff. So, and I want to make clear absolutely on that.
When codes change, and like you said, they change every so many years, especially. I get that. But
the scenario that you just talked through, right?
Yeah.
Can that happen? Yes. Is it anybody's goal or objective for that to happen? No. Do we work with everybody to try and find resolution to those things? Yes. Our hierarchy of violations is designed to not focus on things that are more technical and not really dangerous in nature. They're really designed to focus on really dangerous things that could cause harm, right? So we do that on purpose so that we're not splitting hairs every single time we do one of those types of inspections. I absolutely will recognize that that can happen. It's even happened to me. And I ran a regional office well before I became a deputy director. So I know what that can happen. I want to tell you about the education of every fire marshal. Fire marshals come from all walks of life. They don't all just come from being firefighters. I have people with master's degrees, I have builders, I have engineers that are fire marshals. I also have firefighters that are fire marshals. I have contractors that were carpenters or master carpenters that decided that they wanted to come in and do building inspections for us. So they come from all of these different fields. I have to try and find ways to train them and then certify them. So they all go through inspector training and certification to become fire marshals, so that all of those different things become very similar in nature, so that we have less of those things that you're talking about of when I walk through a building. I will absolutely recognize that. Can it happen? Yes, it absolutely can. It's more likely in a building like a ski club than it is probably in any other occupancy in the state of Vermont. And I'm not knocking ski clubs. I'm just going to explain that ski clubs tend to do a ton of their own work. So every time that they do a work party or somebody thinks that they have a great idea, or they add a new shelf or split up bedrooms or add doors or things like that, it's an opportunity for a violation of a code. Right? That's all it is. So they, historically, it is more apt to happen in those types of buildings. It's less likely in a condo, and it's really a lot less likely in a single family home. But it can happen. It absolutely can.
Yeah, and I want to just follow that. That's not, I know it's happened to people here, so
Yeah.
It's not an attack on you know, the fire division. It really is just maybe, and not that you didn't understand, but making sure you see the perspective of why people don't call sometimes. And you know, for a small permit, let's even go the small one.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to open that can of worms. It worries them that as soon as they call you and ask a question, you know, all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe I do need to go check on that place. And I don't think you're calling them out, but it just has that feel. It just is what it is.
I want to challenge that thought process with building a relationship with your fire marshal so that you don't have that fear. I know that I have thousands of contractors that I've worked with in 20 years that call me still to this day. And they'll bypass, there's a whole team below me, right? They have my cell phone number, they will call me. I actually have a fire alarm contractor that emailed me as soon as I got here, from this 2.5 hours away from here. So I encourage everybody to take a little different approach, with the understanding that the information and the perspective that I get from all of you, I get to take back, and I get to help make that change, right? That's my job. But I also want to leave you with building that relationship with those fire marshals, the electrical inspector and the plumbing inspector is going to make everything a lot easier for you and them. If you're all comfortable through a process, it makes things so much easier. It really does.
We're in the process of interviewing fire alarm vendors. We're not happy with who we have.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my understanding that they do annual inspections on behalf of the state.
They do.
Do they have a certification?
They do.
Do all of them have it?
Each one is separate and independent. They are called TQPs, technically qualified people.
Right.
They all prove that they have training to be able to complete those tasks. I'm going to use fire alarm as an example. If you're a master electrician in the state of Vermont, you can get a fire alarm TQP because you're at a high level of education with wiring and hopefully fire alarm. Yes, we do have a process. We do certify them all. We do have a tracking program that we can see who has not completed inspections on an annual basis. But yeah, that's all true. Sprinkler, fire alarm, chemical suppression. There's a lot of them, or there's a few more. Gas, oil are certifications. Chimney sweep is a certification. So There's one more TQP that I am forgetting.
So, I was told, actually by several potential vendors, that if they come in to make a repair, replace a smoke or whatever, that doesn't require a permit. If they put in a new panel, that requires a permit.
Yeah, that wouldn't be true. So changing, there's a really nice laptop here. Is that a MacBook? Yes. This device changes throughout time, just like a fire alarm system does. You can't just take any fire alarm device and connect it to a fire alarm system. We do have some guidance that we provide to technically qualified people, fire alarm installers, to either extend or replace devices if they fail without having to get a permit. But that's it. I mean, anything else that's being done to that system requires a permit. And it requires an electrical work notice also, not just a fire alarm.
So if it's a
permit.
broken wire that they repair, they...
Hopefully they replace.
But you're saying they self-certify or self-inspect anyway?
They don't.
Not for something like that?
Yeah, so what a TQP does, and this is the legal requirement, they inspect the system to the way that it was installed to make sure that it's functional. They're not there to, a master electrician can do any fire alarm work in the state of Vermont. They just can't certify that system unless they're a technically qualified person. That's the difference. So a TQP is only their primary responsibility is to make sure that system is working and it's functional and that it's been inspected appropriately. But what's that?
Not to maintain.
Not to maintain it or to. They can be the same person. I don't want to say they can't be. They can, but that's not what they're for. Two different things, I guess. Two different lanes.
Hey, Landon?
Yes.
Do you guys have on your website like a quick worksheet of things that need to be inspected for, we'll say like, most of us are lodge owners, like what needs to be inspected yearly and what should be inspected yearly? Is there like a rough form that says, hey, if you own a B&B or a lodge in Vermont, these are the following things that should be inspected on a yearly basis with the people that should do it, or the types of people that should do it?
I don't think there's something that's all encompassing like that as a code information sheet. It's probably something we could look at developing. The problem, I'm going to tell you that every problem with a code information sheet is as soon as something's not on it, somebody says it's not on that sheet. Even if I put this is not all inclusive, we reference these standards, somebody will absolutely come back to me and say, well, it's not on that sheet, I'm not doing it. So that being said, remember earlier I was talking about all the different occupancy types. Each one of those can have different requirements and different maintenance requirements for different things, depending on what it is. Like a hospital has a lot more requirements for inspection, testing, and maintenance than, say, an inn would have. Way different. You don't want those requirements. They're monthly, quarterly, and then annually. So they're way different. But yeah, we can absolutely. I'm going to tell you that we encourage this interaction, and if there are ideas or things that you want to work with the Division of Fire Safety to help with your specific industry, let us know. We're all for it. But code information sheets can be dangerous for us. We've learned that throughout time. But we will try and develop something and see how it works. But everything's pretty much annually, except for your boiler. That's every 2 years. Unless it's specific to the manufacturer. Yeah.
Back to the permit question. I was in, sprung a toilet leak on the second floor on Sunday, had the plumbers come in to diagnose that it needs to be replaced. So it's getting replaced tomorrow. They're all licensed, so that's fine there. But there's water damage to a ceiling below.
Yeah.
Does that require a permit for me to repair the water damage, which is a wooden ceiling, which means pulling it down,
Yeah.
some insulation repairs and things like that? Should I pull a permit?
Yeah. And I'm going to tell you why.
It's the asphalt shingle, it's going to lead to another thing.
Yeah. I'm not trying to complicate things, and honestly, it probably is not. I hope that the water damage was not great, because this is the time of year that we have so many freeze-ups in Vermont, and water damage is just horrible for us.
Something that should be clear.
Yeah,
And then so if I go online, there's a 2-page,
yeah, under 200K permit.
and the turnaround time is,
It's pretty quick, so we tell everybody 30 days, but our average is 11 to 16. So
but I can't start the damage, so in the interim I have,
if you call the fire marshal and ask to start repair work, you can get conditions, but only from the fire marshal that covers that area. And that does happen on a regular basis. I typically ask to do it via email, so that you have a record and I have a record, and then nobody can say they don't have a record.
But that is just a paper application. It would have to be mailed in or dropped off. You cannot submit it online. So just keep that in mind when you're factoring your time and making your calls.
It's not far though.
Right.
I drove from there today. Yeah?
So along those lines, I work for a restoration company. So my guys, when they go into a situation like this, are pulling permits?
Well, they should be. Any construction, alteration, renovation, or demolition.
Yeah, again, to say, I'm assuming that's what they do, but
I'm
I
gonna
didn't know because of an insurance issue that they were, because the timing is of the essence that.
Yeah. And that's where building those relationships with fire marshals that cover your area is really important, because it's going to help expedite that process. Every permit that we get that is for a natural disaster or an impact to somebody's property from fire or water damage, we do our absolute best to expedite all those processes. I hope that you all understand that. We waived 100% of all of our fees for everything that happened during all of our floods. We really do try to accommodate all those things. Where it's a little complicated if you have restoration services is sometimes the owner wants to handle all the permitting, and sometimes you want to handle all the permitting because you want to say, I've done it, it's easy, I've done this 1,000 times, it's a 2-page document and a description of the work. It requires some kind of communication, and that's it. But as long as somebody is doing it, it's typically pretty easy. But yeah, it happens every day. We had 2 sprinkler saves. I'm going to call them saves, but with those sprinkler activations in tall buildings, there was water damage for the stories below them in Vermont in the last month. And they were both actual fires that the sprinkler systems worked and extinguished and saved lives. But the unfortunate effect of that is there was some water damage. We expedited every one of those permits to get 17 units reoccupied as quickly as possible that had to be temporarily unoccupied in one case, and I think the other one had 15 displaced families. So my fire marshal was there multiple times during a single week to make sure everything was going in a direction that would move in a forward direction. So, and I know that's drastic. But it's the same scenario. You had some water damage, and that's really not something anybody wants to do. That's not fun. But if you have a relationship and you reach out to the fire marshal, say, hey, I'm filing my paperwork. Can I get started on this? I want to replace in kind. I'm taking down this. I want to check for water damage, dry it out, maybe spray some mold preventative, or depending on what the situation is at find. Most of them are pretty receptive to that scenario.
Are the fire marshals listed on the website for the region? Just double check. Okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
So www.firesafety.vermont.gov, left-hand side, bottom, contact us, click on that. We have an interactive map. Don't use that. We're locked out of it right now because the license, the state agency that was helping us with it, we're locked out for right this second. But on the left-hand side of that, there's our regional offices. Okay. Just click on that, and every one of our fire marshals' phone numbers will be listed on there. Emails work really well for all of the teams. They typically, all staff typically check their email in the morning and the afternoon if they're field inspectors. If they're plan reviewers, they're typically checking their mail throughout the day. Yes.
Chris Lauber, Resort and Racket Club. Obviously, the sprinkler issue is a big one in the valley, just especially for multi-unit residential dwellings. We also have a private recreation center. Just wondering about, you say your slogan is educate, educate, enforcement. What does that enforcement look like? Because obviously this is a big capital project that requires significant funds. What does the typical enforcement look like? Is there like a multi-year plan of steps to follow? And then a follow-up to that would be, is there a specific designer and installer that has to be certified through the state, or is that something you can complete on our own?
I'm not sure. So the educate, educate, and enforce is typically when something bad has happened and it's not getting fixed. Or if there's a violation that somebody's already been told about to fix it and they're not fixing it. We have options. There's something called the plan of compliance. If you have an issue and we have documented what that issue is and we provided that to you, you can provide us with the plan of compliance saying, this is the violation, this is how I plan to fix it, and then this is the date it would be fixed by. And that gets submitted to the fire marshal for review. And if it's accepted, it's a contract between that organization and the Division of Fire Safety saying that, hey, I'm asking for time, this is how I'm gonna fix it, and this is when it will be fixed by and ready for inspection. It's a phenomenal tool, and it gives the individual that we're working with a lot of ability to say, hey, I think that I can get this resolution done by this day, and that works within my budget. I can add this to my capital expenditure plan or my capital budget or whatever it may be that's difficult at the time. Even finding a contractor sometimes can require a plan of compliance to be utilized because they're so far out. But it is a tool and it can be used. Can you give me a little bit more information about what the problem is?
Just curious in general. For other dwellings and buildings that are in a similar situation, if there's like an enforcement plan of steps to take to reach that inspection and certification, or what does it look like starting from point A to point Z?
Yeah. Inspections are the number one. Let's start how they happen. Typically, inspections are prioried by complaint. We receive a complaint on a property, that's a priority. We're obligated to file up on complaints within 72 hours, especially if it's a life safety risk. The next issue would be high-risk occupancies, meaning residential occupancies, hospitals, assembly occupancies, places that are nightclub-like settings are high risk for us. So they get prioritized. So if there's extra time from this is the next priority. That's the way this is gonna work. Then from there, we use our risk assessment or our known violations of a building. It's very rare for someone to just have a fire marshal say, I'm coming to a 400-unit condo development and I'm just gonna start inspecting them all. It's not unheard of because we do receive complaints that can't be, it will prompt that inspection process, I guess is a good way to say it. But did that answer the question?
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions at all? You know, one of the things that kind of comes to mind for me, just from, you know, my perspective as the chamber director, is I hear from a lot of businesses, and I think that sometimes they conflate things like with the insurance, and you know, they don't. The insurance company doesn't want you to have a wood stove. It's not the fire marshal, and so I think some people, you know, misunderstand that and conflate those things. You know, a big issue it came up with, you know, short-term rentals around here, and you know, it's obviously a big issue, and you know, from where you're from down in Ludlow. You know, I hear from a lot of our lodge owners that they're being held to a higher standard, and that from a competitive perspective, it's really hard for them that they have to charge more because they have to comply with all these different things, whether it be fire or septic or whatever. And I know that's not your thing. And, you know, it's really interesting to be at this and hear from you because, you know, I don't think of you guys as like law enforcement, but you are. You're not necessarily law enforcement, but yeah, it is law enforcement. You have laws that you have to that you're searching for.
Yeah, no guns, no guns.
But what do, you know, if I'm trying to work with the lodging community, or if I'm trying to work with the short-term rental folks, because I think everyone, for the most part, wants to be safe and wants to do the right thing. You know, if there's fairness issues, who is it that we should be talking? Is it a legislative thing?
Well,
Or am I opening up yet another can of worms?
who's the legislators in the
There's
room?
no, I don't think there are any.
That's can't be true. No. So it's not. I want to talk about the fairness thing from a Division of Fire Safety standpoint. I'm on both sides of the equation. Not even a month ago, I was at the short-term rental conference with all the zoning administrators for the entire state. And now I'm here. But we've identified what a reasonable risk is, and we have provided information including assessment documentation, tax documentation, and it's available on our webpage for short-term rentals, so that there is some knowledge that should be going to any short-term rental that sleeps 8 people or less, saying you can't do that unless you have smoke detectors, you're following these tax laws, and these Department of Health laws are also applicable to you. I will also say that any complaint that the Division of Fire Safety receives that's a valid complaint on a short-term rental, they get the same attention that any inn or hotel or dormitory would get. So everything is equal from our perspective, and we do try to capture everybody. Like I mentioned before, we don't isolate or pick on any type of specific use or occupancy, and that's an important distinction. A lot of the things that I've heard from innkeepers or small hotel or motel owners is my level of safety is greater than this level of safety, and that could be true for a building that sleeps 8 or more people is where that designation should be. Because all of the other quantifying numbers are the same. 9 to 16, if they stick that many people in a house, I'm using the same standards and codes. They may be applied differently because a house is a lot different layout than, say, a hotel or a motel, right? But the codes and the standards are going to be applied for the type of building that it is. And that's the way that they're designed. It's not like a fire marshal makes that up. That's the way you evaluate a building, you apply the codes and standards for that type of structure. What I mean by that is there's a huge difference in codes between a 1-story building and a 4-story building, right? But we don't offer that same assessment form and documentation to rooming and to short-term rentals that sleep more than 8 people. So when they're identified and we have the availability to inspect them, we absolutely do. And when we receive complaints on them, we absolutely do. I also want to say there's a lot more residential occupancies than the Division of Fire Safety could absolutely inspect in a year throughout the state. And I'm not going to talk numbers because it can be a pretty dynamic issue, but there are, if you go to Airbnb or Vacation Rentals by Owner right now and you type in any of our geographical areas that have a ski area near it, there is going to be quite a few of those listed.
About 700 in the Mad River Valley.
Yeah, that's a good amount. That's 2 inspectors for an entire year dedicated to that one to inspect.
And that's with no day off, days
with
off.
no days off, yes.
And just, I guess a quick follow-up to that is the question of occupancy though in those dwellings, that you're saying 1 to 8 and 9 to 16, but a 2-bedroom that's occupancy should be like 4 people can have 20 people in it if they decide to put a bunch of bunk beds in there.
Yeah, we count beds.
Okay, so.
Yeah. When we go do the inspections, we actually count beds. And that's controversial also. because some people will say, this is a foal, not a queen. No, it gets that, it does. But no, we are counting, when we inspect them, we're counting beds. There's always gonna be people that don't wanna follow rules. Yeah. And and it's tough for all of us, and I understand from being from the Ludlow area, the impact that it can have on an industry, on multiple industries.
Yeah. Any other questions? Did you have a question? You all good? Okay.
I'm gonna try and answer it if you have one.
I really appreciate you. Go ahead.
I'm the new manager of the pitch ring, so I'm getting caught up on things. An instance where several years ago I was just the property manager, had an inspection, and I know, like you were saying, you have a small staff, and you just mentioned that it's a 10-day, the report comes out. And so I had mentioned at the time, well, there's quite a few things on there. It was like extension cords, I'm going to use this as my to-do list. I look forward to your report. 10 days, 20 days, 6 months, and then I still don't have that report. And so then follow-up comes in because the cycle comes around and a different inspector or an inspector, oh, this was it, and you haven't done any of these. So whose responsibility is, do I need to nag or follow up? Or then you come back and say, you're in violation, I can shut you down because you haven't done these.
I think you'd have a pretty good argument to say you haven't been put on notice of any violations if you don't receive any documentation.
I appreciate the volume of inspections out there and all.
I'm going to tell you that I mentioned in the beginning that I have 4 regional managers. If you're having difficulty working through a fire marshal or getting a document, giving them a call it's not like calling somebody's boss. They are their boss. But sometimes people need a reminder. We try not to create that environment with what we do. And what I mean by that is, obviously a fire marshal's report is a really important document. It's a legal document. It's identifying violations of state law that we have identified. So until you really get it, you're not under violation. And that's the way that I would understand that.
I have a good relationship with the gentleman that does our, and I'm not worried about that.
Yeah. Could it happen? I'm never going to say it can't. I will say that we unfortunately have had fire marshals get hurt and we have to backtrack, especially when there's open documentation. We've had some that have needed emergency leave, and we've had some that need assistance to be able to catch up. That does happen, especially to some of my investigators. But communication is absolutely key, and letting us know your perspective is very important to me. I absolutely will follow up and see if we can't create a code information sheet that will be helpful for people. But let us know if there's a problem, and we'll absolutely try to find a way to relieve. A problem brought us all here together today. Something was recognized. We're all here discussing perspective and getting a better idea of some of the things that are going on.
And I really appreciate the fact that, I think we sometimes lose sight of the fact that in a small state like Vermont, these things can't happen. And I think we're really fortunate, and I think the state of Vermont, in my experience, not just in your department, in a lot of departments are really quite responsive, and our legislators are quite responsive, and you call them, and I appreciate you guys coming, I appreciate Allison coming, and Landon, and you will post on the recording of this with the website and everything. But I really, again, I appreciate you guys coming. I want to thank Yestamara for hosting us. If you haven't been here before, this is a great opportunity to check out what they're doing here. And again, as I want to reiterate what I said earlier, that this, I think, is a really prime example of the Chamber of Commerce at its best. When things come up, issues that we didn't necessarily were planning on having this, and We want to help, something comes up at a meeting that turns into something else, and the unintended consequences of developing relationships and getting to know people is really what the chamber is all about. So I know a lot of you here are chamber members, and I thank you for your support. And if you're not a chamber member and you want to be, I'd love to talk to you and take your money. Yeah, so thank you very much, and thanks also to Mad River TV for hosting this. Oh, you have one question? Yeah?
Yeah, and if you have other questions, also reach out to your local fire chiefs, because they can also be a huge resource.
Absolutely. I'm really glad that you brought that up, because we were talking about it earlier. I literally threw out my Christmas tree this morning because of what I saw on Instagram from the Warren Fire Department. So my house will not be burning down tonight.
And if I recall correctly, Sherwood is also collecting Christmas trees.
That they're what?
That they're collecting old Christmas trees.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much. Appreciate it, guys, and thanks everyone for coming. Nice to see you. See you in a million hours. Got a minute?